But we are continuing our series on this idea of formation, this idea that we are so moldable. Each one of us is set up in a way that the things around us have such huge impact on us. And that can be for good or for not so good. But I believe, as we've been walking through this series, that God has made us so that we are moldable. He has made us so that we can be made into His likeness. We can be transformed by Him. Right? We can walk with Him and continually be made new. And we've kind of talked about some different angles of how that works. We've talked about how this doesn't necessarily mean that we are being formed into a robot. We're being formed into some casing that all of us should look exactly the same. No, each of us have gifts and skills and perspectives and good things that God has put in us. And each of us, if we're honest, have some things that we can work on. Some fears, some anxieties that are maybe pushing us around, some traits, some places where we kind of protect in ways that aren't helpful. We've been bumped and bruised in certain ways that we respond in different ways. And this being Memorial Day weekend, we're going to tie some of that in. And it really is today where we're going to go is in this idea of how do we join with God in a practice of being generous and kind of open up what that might look like. Now, last week, if you were here, we kind of talked a little bit about community, but also this idea of community. And I had a number of people talk to me after going like, so what does this mean? And we talked about this idea of being aware of ourselves and being aware of others around us, that, how we show up isn't always our best. Isn't always our best. And we may be in places where we're not doing so well, or maybe other people aren't doing so well, and we need to have some wisdom on how we interact with each other. Right? And Jesus in the scriptures tells us we need to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. So we love and we care and we connect, but we just need to be aware that, like, is our loving and caring and connecting kind of overreaching or healing some things that really God should be healing, and we get into these weird places. And a lot of times in community, especially in church, we just never really talk about that side of things. That there's some wisdom that needs to be put in there. And it also can explain many times if we have had issues. If we had issues with people and we've gotten really hurt, we can look back and go, you know what? Maybe I wasn't as healthy as I could have been. And maybe they were going through some stuff. And there's grace that is applied. And if you heard last week, if you heard a message of stay away from everyone, they're scary. That wasn't the intention. But they are scary. This is being recorded, so I have to be careful. Last week it didn't work. That's what happens when the recording doesn't work. You're going to get something wild. I know it's not being recorded, but a number of years ago, as we talk about this idea of being formed, we talk about personality, and we talk about how God has made us. I remember a number of years ago, maybe a decade or more ago, we had this situation where there was someone who was kind of a friend who's involved in our life, and they took some magical personality test, and the personality test told them who they should hang out with, and we were on a list of people that they shouldn't hang out with anymore, because the personality test had told them that if they want to succeed, they need to surround. And I'm like, were you at a Chinese restaurant? Was it like in a wheel? Was there like a goat and like a rat on there or something? Because that sounds a little weird, right? So we can take even good things that are, like finding who we are and trying to improve ourselves, and we can take those to a level where it's like, what? What are you talking about? So we all kind of carry those things with us as we go. And this is in the church and outside the church, right? Walmart is a dangerous place. Right? Anywhere you go, you got to kind of be watching. And it's unwise to not be watching and be looking. But today we want to talk about the other side of that coin, is generosity. Is giving of ourselves to others in a way that will cost us. Because here's the deal. You can be as wise as any serpent that's out there, which I don't really understand that whole idea that he's talking about there. as wise as serpent. I guess serpents are wise, maybe, I don't know. But be cunning, be very alert, be very aware. You can have all of that high awareness, and here's the deal. If you don't enter into risk, you don't really get an opportunity to trust God. To trust God with the things around you. If you don't step into that unknown, yes, you do all your things and you look and you go, is this what you're doing? Is this safe? Is this really smart? Eventually, there's always a gap. There's always a step that is like, I don't know if I can make that jump. And if we never take that risk, we never step into a place of generosity, we never get to see God really open up some really awesome things in our lives and in other people's lives. This moves beyond safeguarding, moves beyond enabling, moves beyond those things. It just says sometimes we have to make the jump. We have to give of ourselves in a way that costs us something. And here on Memorial Day, we're remembering those who took a risk, who took the ultimate risk, whether it be in the armed services. It's just, if you ever just want to have a good cry, just Google some of the documentaries of 9/11 and these going through the lives of these men and women who just, everyone's running out and they're running in. They know that the integrity of the building and the fire and the smoke and all this is going to be damaging, but they're putting on their gear. They're moving in. They're sacrificing it all. They see the danger. They see all the warning signs that say, go away, but they were, I believe, generous, ultimately generous with their life, their skills, and they not only were they just, there are stories of passerbyers who jump into the fray, but most of them have been training their whole lives to be this generous in this moment, ready to give it all at any moment. And while we may not be asked of that in our lives, there are little comparisons that we can step into. There's moments where we come near to people's lives and you go, you know what? I feel an urge of God to help. I feel to step into the situation is probably going to cost me something. I might even get hurt, hopefully just emotionally. A number of years ago, I was doing some youth work and I don't think I was a very good youth leader. There's like safety precautions you should follow, and when you're young and you have younger people, you don't always follow safety precautions. And I had a group of young men, meaning they were like 2 years younger than me, young boys, and we would get together after our little youth group meeting, and then I found these little documentaries and videos of God just moving really powerfully in the world. People doing the street ministry stuff, doing all this stuff. And then I would take them down into downtown Auburn, Lewiston at 10, 11 plus at night. So here's these boys from the woods stepping into the city. They learned a lot of things about the world that they probably shouldn't have learned in that setting. I don't know if their parents knew all the things they were really getting involved in, but we had intoxicated people trying to sell us drugs. We had, people who were working the night, if you will, coming up to us. And we eventually found that going to Denny's was a little safer than other places. But Denny's at 1 a.m. is a wild place. But it was a little safer, a little more controlled. There's at least 4 walls and you don't know what's moving around you. And we would hang out with people, we would buy people's meals, we'd offer to pray for them. And we had some pretty exciting stories. And there was one story where one of the things that we kind of found ourselves doing, for better or for worse, was we would give people rides. Because that seemed to be a need, as people would kind of find their way into Denny's. They're late at night, they're either inebriated or they are working third shift or whatever, and they're walking long distances across town. So we started giving people rides, and there was one man we gave a ride to, and he was pretty out of it, and we brought him home, and he invited us into his home, and so we're full of faith and excitement, and we go, yeah, we'll come in, right? Which is probably a no in most normal people's minds. We go into his little apartment, and he shows us these pigeons that are supposedly like illegal or something. He was really proud of his illegal pigeons. They look like pigeons to me that he just found. and we were in that space, and so he started to explain to us how he's been kicked out of many churches, and we could see why. He was pretty out there. And so we decided, one of the kids had his guitar in the car, we brought his guitar in, and he had a lot of like these little Bible study track type things in his home, and because people have probably witnessed to this guy a lot, because he kind of draws a crowd to himself. And we actually found in there Ray and Laura Verrill, who attend church here. They're camping this week. I thought you'd be camping, but you're here. Thank you. It was great worship together. But we found in his house, we're looking through this Bible, I go, this is Ray Verrill's Bible. How do you know Ray Verrill? He didn't know him. Ray probably just gave it to him at some point and connecting with this guy. And we said, you know what, you get kicked out of church, we're going to bring church to your apartment. We're going to sing a few songs. Someone's going to read, I threw the pamphlet at someone and said, you're going to read the Bible lesson. And then I asked him, do you have any crackers or juice or anything like that? He had some saltines and cranberry juice. I said, we're going to do communion. All right, some of you who have, that might really offend you, but we were working with what we had, okay? We were like kids in this guy's thing. We start playing the music, and he's like, I like this is good, yeah. And he's singing the songs with us a little bit, and then the guy reads the pamphlet, and he's like, on the spot, and then I go, let's do communion together, and the guy flips out. I mean, he starts yelling, he starts like throwing stuff around, he goes in the other room, closes the door, and he's just freaking out. He's saying that he's Moses, and just going over the top, and I was like, all right guys, we have extended our stay, pack up your stuff, we are leaving quickly, we are out of here, we're in downtown Lewiston, I don't know where we are. The realization that this probably wasn't the best of ideas settles in, and we leave out, and we're out in the parking lot, and we can hear him yelling out the window all these obscenities and swearing, and just, anyway, we leave in a little bit of like a shock. But I'll tell you, those 4 or 5 guys have a story forever. They have a story forever. And we see that guy around. We bought hockey tickets off the guy. All right? And so we went to the hockey game looking for him. And we found him, and he didn't remember us. He didn't know any of the event. And we tried to keep up with him for a while, but we kept losing track of him. And I look at it, and I go, there was probably some things we shouldn't have done. Probably the whole premise of what we were doing probably should have been something more for college-age kids than, the kids that we had. They were pretty young and whatnot. But because we took those risks, we have these stories, and it built up our faith. It built up our thing, and we started to pray in our times before we'd go out. God, make us effective in some way that we could interact with that situation in a better way. Like, give us some wisdom, give us some power, give us some things. And if we always play it safe, we'll never have any stories. We'll never have any stories. Now, if we lose wisdom and we just go for everything, like we talked about last week, and you listen to last week's message, if that's what you're hearing. There's a both and in here. If you have a Bible, I want you to open to 2 Kings. I know it's going to be kind of a hard one to find. It's kind of Old Testament book that we don't open to very much. 2 Kings chapter 4. If you don't have a Bible, you don't want to pull up on your phone, this is kind of a narrative story, so it's a little easier to follow along with. But when we are being generous, we are being generous with everything that we have. But more importantly, we want to be generous with the things of God. We are walking around in the world with the presence of God, the Spirit of God in us, on us, around us. I don't know how all that works. I don't know where the Spirit hangs out. Right? But God is with us, and we show up in the world. We want to make sure that that is what we are bringing. Well, yes, I believe we should be generous with everything we have. One of the things that we've, through some conversations in our small group, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, of just how to respond to the ever-growing homeless population we have in Maine. I've grown up in Maine, proudly say, 45 minutes probably from this spot my whole life. It's probably a few years here and there we've gone outside that range, but here, this place. When I was a kid, I never remember seeing someone on a corner panning. Anyone else been in kind of the area? You never saw that. I mean, here and there, sure. And if you did, like, everybody kind of knew the person, and you know, there's just like part of the community in their way, and usually some kind of mental health or something going on. But now we see it everywhere. So one of the things we've started, Kelly and I, she's got these little bags just filled with snacks and socks and just little different things. So when you see that person on the side of the street, you can pop out and say, hey, here you go, right? We have these little things that we've got in the back here that they're just the Gospel of John. And it has some little kind of just helpful hints along it. And I'm gonna pop a few in there, those in there, and you know, maybe a few bucks. And so when you're driving around, you just go, here you go. Be blessed, right? Is that gonna solve the problem? Probably not. But what it's doing is, in me, is starting to turn me towards generosity, right? There's maybe, I don't know, $10 worth of stuff in there. You know, it's probably not gonna solve the homeless problem we have in our country, in our state. But it turns me towards generosity. And here's the deal. Well, that may not fix it. That may not bring in all the pieces we need. There's some situations that there's never going to be enough money to fix. There's some situations that there's never enough counseling or fellowship. There's none of those things. But God can transform situations. That is what we want to be generous with in many ways. So let's read this account in 2 Kings. I love this little story that we see here, this little account. It says, the wife of a man from a company of the prophets cried out to Elisha. If you read Kings, there's Elijah, Elisha. It makes it confusing. You did it on purpose, I know it. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord, but now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves. Right? So Elisha is a prophet. This woman comes out saying her husband has died, and they have bills to pay, and in this time, there's no security. There's nothing coming in on there, and this is what they would do. You have to sell yourself as like an indentured servant to someone else. And she doesn't want this to happen, obviously. This is a terrible place to be in. Elijah replied to her, how can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house? Your servant has nothing there at all, she said, except a small jar of olive oil. So she's like, this is all I got. This is all I have working for me. It's a small jar of olive oil. Elisha said, go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Do not ask just for a few. Then go inside and shut your door behind you and your sons. Pour the oil into the jars as each is filled. Put it aside. She left him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, bring me another jar. But he replied, there is no jars left. Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, Elisha, and he said to her, go and sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left. Now this is, a pretty wild miracle. Right? Because you kind of read through the story. What's happening is, as they go and they gather these jars, she has this one jar, and as she pours into this one jar, there's still some, and it pours into the next jar, and there's still some, to the point where she's like, give me some more jars. And they're like, we're all out. We've taken them all up. And this is kind of an interesting kind of repeated thing that happens throughout the Old Testament, of a lamp burning longer than they should, and God providing and moving forward. It's just this idea of God's presence and his being with us, Emmanuel, saying there's enough. What I also love about this story is the community around her helped in their own way. Right? The sons came, they knocked on the door. We need some jars. And I could see the folks we barely have enough. Their dad did die, and whatever. It's just some jars. We'll help as we can. The next home. Yeah, here's a jar. Here's 2 jars. Here's a few jars. And one son's in the back of all these jars. Kind of, I imagine it kind of like a Little Rascal scene or something. Pulling a wagon, the dog, the guy. But the community was generous with what they had. They came along and helped in the way that they could, and then God miraculously makes the rest work. When we step into people's lives, maybe it's a lack of faith that we don't tell people to do something like this, or maybe it's just God is not moving in our lives in this way. But when we do our little, we give what we can, it provides this bigger space for God to move. If none of her neighbors had said, sorry, we don't have a jar for you. Right? This is like pre-Walmart by like 5,000 years. Right? Having a jar, having these things would be costly. It wouldn't be so simple as it would be for us today. To go, sure, I got all kinds of jars. Let's go up in the attic. I don't know, we haven't canned in like 10 years. We got all these jars. No, this would have been costly to give in this way. If none of the neighbors had been generous, she would have had her oil. Maybe a couple of jars she had. It would have multiplied a little. It would have been this miraculous miracle, but not enough to pay the debts. When we join in with God, we don't know what is already set in motion in people's lives. We don't know this one little act of kindness, this one, helping someone meet a need, helping step into this little space. It may be a part of a bigger picture that God is using to provide a way out for this person. And many times we can get overwhelmed with the situation, overwhelmed with how is the little bit that I am going to do, how is that going to fix this huge problem? A story that we could also look at is in Matthew 14. So it might be a little more. I'm in the right spot here. Yes, Matthew 14. Reiterating this idea of a little, that when it's put into God's hands, more is made. Matthew 14, starting in verse 13, it says this: Jesus heard what had happened. He withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. So we talked about this a number of weeks ago. The idea of going to a solitary place is a spiritual practice. Even Jesus models over and over. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it is already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Right? Now, many times when we read through these accounts, and we know where the story's going for many of us, and we've seen this portrayed in many ways, we kind of give the disciples a bad rap on things. But I read it and I go, these guys are just doing logistics. It's getting late. We don't have enough food. The party's gone too long, Jesus. It's time to wrap it up. Right? There's nothing sinister or lack of faith in here. They're just, they listened to last week's message. They said, we can't be responsible for all these people this long. We don't have the means to do this. If we keep these people here long enough, there's going to be problems. I also read into this a little bit that, excuse me, I read into this a little bit too, that maybe for the disciples with Jesus, there were many times that there was enough time to get food to the people. Like this was maybe something they did regularly, was they would gather crowds, Jesus would teach, and they would gather in food and provide for people. But they're saying, today it's just too late. We did that whole boat trip thing because you tweaked out because people were excited that, John the Baptist just died and you're kind of going through some stuff. So, the day is just too long. We need to wrap it up. And then Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said, as he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 bread and looked up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So the number could have been much larger. And when this story is repeated, it's a little longer in a few other places, but we know that this is a young boy who brings these few loaves and these few fishes. He brings his lunch to Jesus. So we see here that the logical response would be to send the people away. There's no shame in that. There's some wisdom in that. But for some reason in this moment, because Jesus does not have a problem leaving the crowds. We see that over and over and over. He's actually kind of the opposite. Once a crowd starts to form, he's like, get me out of here. This is too much. People are getting too excited. But today, for some reason, I think he's experiencing what we call like a gift of faith, or there's something going on. He understands that God's about to do something more. He takes this little bit and he multiplies it. There's this miracle that happens. Again, as the oil was poured out, the bread just kept going. The bread just kept going. The provision of God is there. We provide our little piece and say, God, do what you can. Some of us might have bigger piece, more to give, or more talents, or more skills, or more prone to that. That's fine. Do what you can with that. Some of us might feel like, I have so little. You have a jar? Do you have a lunch? God can use it all. For all of it is His. As a church, we do communion together every week, where we, no matter where our worship landed, worship was just great today, you guys did a great job. Wherever that landed, or wherever the message went, or however awkward the break was for you, we remind ourselves that this whole gathering, this coming together, is to remember that Christ has given it all. He has paid the price. I want to tell you, as we look at through the scriptures, and have you seen this dramatized in film or different ways, we see Jesus on the cross, and for those of us that are followers of Jesus, we see the grandeur that's happening. Right? We see the Son of God who was put on flesh, walked amongst us, performed miracles, lived a perfect life, and then is led like a lamb to slaughter. We see that. But can I tell you, the Romans, the guards who were there, the people who were there, they just saw some crazy Jewish guy that was causing too many problems. That's what they saw. They saw a cup of oil. This is nothing. They saw a plate with just a few fish and some bread on it. They go, all this hoopla for this? But those who knew, Mary, his mother, and John, the disciple he loved, as they're sitting there at the cross, they know this is so much more. This is so much more. This is like a simple thing, a plain thing, an obscure, just almost nothing thing, that when it's poured out, it's going to last. It's going to feed the nations. It's going to feed the hunger of our soul. So as we are to be generous, and we talked about this talk a number of times over the year and trying to come from a different perspective, be looking for what God is doing, for He has poured it out. And there is enough. There is enough mercy. There's enough forgiveness. There's enough grace. There's enough of anything that we need, and it's found in Jesus. So as we are experiencing life with others, we're being wise. Maybe not taking teenagers into downtown Lewiston, into the situations like that. We're being wise, but then there's times where we just go, you know what? I just feel like God's doing something here. I don't have much to contribute. I don't even know how I'm going to do it, but God has poured out enough. I'm going to see if I can tap into that. Can we stand together? We're going to take communion together to remember the sacrifice, remember the poured out love, and the broken body of Jesus. Well, in the moment it may have seemed rather insignificant, but it is the most significant moment in history. This is an open communion. If you're a follower of Jesus, or if you think that Jesus can bring healing to your mind, body, or soul, bring you forgiveness of sins, come and eat. If you're not comfortable, you don't know what's kind of going on right now, it's fine to not partake either. Just sit where you are and just kind of watch. Watch what's going on in the room, and more importantly, watch what's going on inside of you. For logistics, we just kind of go up the side of our rows to the edge, then we come up, grab the elements, and we just come back to our chairs to the center. At this moment, can we come and receive the elements? We come forward. It's not a coincidence that we eat and we drink in this process. It is a symbolic gesture of saying, Jesus, you sustain me. The way food and drink sustains me, Jesus, you are bringing life, nutrients to my soul. The jar being poured out, and even the bread and the fish being multiplied, is pointing to something bigger. Not only do we need to pay the bills, we need to sell something, sure, or we need to feed the people when they're there, but it is in Christ there's enough. A little becomes a lot. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Anyone who comes to him comes to the Father. Those who drink of him, they never thirst again. Those who are satisfied by Jesus can truly be satisfied. For in the world system, 1 cup of oil produces 1 cup of oil. In the world system, 1 plate of food is 1 plate of food. But with God, it's multiplied. So as we take and we eat, we are searching for that satisfaction, searching for that wholeness. So why don't you take and eat, take and drink. Lord, we thank you for your sacrifice. We thank you that you poured yourself out. Your body was broken, your blood was poured out, that we may come to life with you. Lord, we thank you that not only were you crucified, but you were resurrected. That we can share in your pouring out, we can sacrifice ourselves, and we know that you will hold us. You will provide more than we put in. So Lord, give us as a community, give us wisdom to know when to, you can use the analogy, when to send the crowds away, when to not get involved, and have that wisdom and Lord, but give us the faith to risk, to step out, to do the thing that doesn't always make sense, but allows for you to move. We know that you are moving. Let us see. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. Hey.